Professor Tuori is also the author of really interesting books about the Roman legal and political thought, Roman institutions, and Roman law in general, like Ancient Roman Lawyers and Modern Legal Ideas, Lawyers and Savages, and The Emperor of Law, The Emergence of Roman Imperial Adjudication. He also is one of the organizers of the books Roman Law and the Idea of Europe and the Oxford Handbook for Roman Law and Society. So Professor Tuori, thank you once again for accepting our invite. And please be welcome. And the word is all of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So thank you very much for the invitation. I would have very much liked to be in Brazil right now with you rather than to be on this very poor substitute of a video link, but maybe we can rectify the situation later on when the world has hopefully gone back to a slightly more normal footing. So I'm going to be talking today about the Roman republics as in the plural. And what that means that I'm looking at a very long perspective. So how the thought and the ideas of ancient Romans reverberated and were picked up and reinterpreted by later, mostly European, but also extra-European interpreters. So this is a bit starting from my project, the Law, Governance and Space, which is about the long history of republicanism and its relationship with space, especially the built environment. And what I'm interested in, and I have been interested in, is the idea of what's commonly described as the classical reception, the idea that ideas have several lives. And you have one life when you have uttered these thoughts and within this immediate surrounding, and then the words take their own life, as in they can become separate from the intention of the author and they become reinvented, rethought and reworked by authors and interpreters. So it is very much a question of hermeneutics, the idea of the hermeneutic process or hermeneutic circle of always reinterpreting ideas and reinterpreting these interpretations and traditions and getting from these ideas and texts new ideas and reforming them. So my main interests are Rome and Europe. So the idea that Rome is not simply a historical fact, but also a question of self-identification. So the fact that a European writer self-identifies as part of that tradition which goes back to Rome. We have several different ways of doing that. So we have the, of course, the tradition of Rome itself, second Rome, and then the third Rome, Russia and the Russia, Ukraine, the other traditions there. So there is this kind of identity level understanding of these kind of traditions and continuities. But what I'm also very interested in is the kind of practices, the practices of, for example, of administration, practices of law, practices of doing things, and how those, if, for example, in Roman law, you have a tradition of doing something, for example, forms of contract, forms of, for example, legislation, administration, that how those practices have a life of their own, and how those practices are being incorporated into novel traditions, and how those practices, the fact that they come from ancient Rome, that the pedigree of those practices forms an argument in and by itself. So what I'm now talking today is the idea of the Roman republics. So let's start with the PowerPoint, and I'm now excellent. Yeah. So there, by the way, you can see the space law. The name of my project is space law. The website is spacelaw.fi. By the way, a handy tip if you're ever, start making up acronyms for any projects or something, do not name it after a field of science that exists. So I've gotten invitations to go and talk to conferences in space law, as in, space, the satellites and stuff. So yeah, don't do that. Just because the acronym of the project is space law. So to continue, so the question is that what are we talking about when we talk about Roman republics? And that should be very easy. So you say that it's a period of time in Rome from roughly 509 to 27 BC. So from the expulsion of the kings to the ascension of Augustus to the throne of the emperor. But that's not really so easy. There are numerous different republics that identified as Roman or Romanistic or Neo-Roman. So what we are talking about here is very much a case of Roman/Neo-Roman tradition. And in some cases, there is a direct continuity. So there's an importation of laws, importation of administrative practices, legislative practices. In some cases, it is simply a moniker of saying that we are following the ancient Roman traditions. The chief of those traditions, of course, is, if we are talking here, let's see, yeah, here. So the examples that we have, so we have, of course, the Rome itself, so the Roman Republic itself. Then we have the Roman Empire, which is also nominally a republic. So Rome, until the end, retains the structure underneath the imperial governance structure. There remains the republican tradition. But that's not all. In almost all of the Roman cities, so the Roman Republic was a collection of cities or urban centers. Some of them were Roman colonies, some of them were just conurbations of varying levels, but they all had a similar kind of republican structure. That there was a governing body, an equivalent of the Roman Senate. There was the chief magistrate, the Duumvir, and aediles, and also the assembly of the people. So that the Roman republican tradition was multi-layered and multi-level. And when you have the transition from the late antiquity to the Middle Ages, there's still this neo-Roman continuations. There are republics, chief of which the Northern Italian Renaissance Republic, of which Venice was the most ancient. Then there's Florence, Siena, so there's numerous of these very small republics, which all have a direct continuity from the Roman administrative sense, but also a very strict self-identification. And the republican self-identification was, in their case, mainly an oppositional stance towards, for example, the papal rule or the emperor's rule in the north. Then we have also other later Roman style republics, for example, that of the Holland or English Republic, or other smaller republics in the early modern period. And then, of course, the most famously, we have the Enlightenment republics of the United States of America and France, in which this kind of historical fidelity in their attachment to the ancient Roman text and values was most strict. But then the question remains in these cases is that we have many, many different Roman republics. And what makes these republics a Roman republic? Harriet Flower from Princeton has, in her book on Roman republics, questioned whether we can even call the Roman Republic itself, the 509 to 27 BC, whether we can call it a single entity, but rather should we describe it as a series of different entities, since from a purely cultural, administrative, or state succession basis, you cannot really say that this is the same thing. So it is not even like a ship of Theseus, but rather a complete reformulation of those republics throughout number of re-envisioning of its structures. So the question remains, what are the common traits and what are the continuities that from this ancient period continue on with the with what we now recognize as being the core traits of a republic. And that's, I have this very tentative structure of the idea of liberty or libertas, which I'm following here the text of Fritz Schulz, noted Roman law scholar, and his ideas of equality and authority. And like Schulz, would say that this is the key point or the key idea of republicanism is the combination of the positions of the citizen and the magistrate. That on the other hand, you have the equality of the citizens among themselves, and that citizens are component parts of the Republican citizen body, so that the Republic exists as a collection of citizens that exercises its self-governance. And the rights and duties of that citizen, the citizen has a right to very strictly delineated rights with regards to the law, but also duties such as, military service, taxation, and so forth. But the idea is that the citizen is a core component. The citizens and the citizen body makes the republic. And then the second main trait is, of course, that of the authority. So quite often, if you look at how republicanism is discussed, there is a very tight focus in traditional descriptions on the kind of assemblies, the kind of political process, the elections, legislative processes, the rights of vetoes, and so forth. I would like to focus more on the role of the magistrates. The magistrate as the authority figure, so that the magistrate who is authorized by the assembly So the magistrate is given power by the assembly and thus by the citizens themselves, and given a very strong authority to govern both with regards to the citizens themselves, but also external relations. So the magistrate, the power and responsibility of that magistrate, so that the magistrate has, in the Roman Republican schemes, a very strict idea of, it has these powers. So for example, the Roman highest magistrate had the power of the imperium, and also responsibilities, so that you have very strict tasks of what a magistrate can do and cannot do, and that there is a very strict limitation of where and when, so that a magistrate can also only exercise power within his provincia. That means the field in which, so provincia can be a physical territory, for example, such as a province, but also an abstract idea of a field of operation. And of course that a magistrate has no power that is not given to him by the citizen body through these elections. And a magistrate is also always a citizen primarily, and then the magistrate secondarily. And so that the magistrate becomes, after the term ends, the magistrate becomes a citizen again, a mere citizen again. And these are the traits that have been emulated, have been repeated, have been copied, and have been discussed in extenso throughout all of these republicanist schemes. You find these similar kinds of discussions from Machiavelli onwards during the French Revolution, during the American Revolution, in the Federalist Papers, everywhere where these are being discussed, this Roman Republican tradition, these are the core components of what is and should be the Republican tradition. And you can see quite clearly what is the thing that they are guarding against, and that is self-rule. They are guarding against an unauthorized tyrant who overrides the rights of the citizens, usurps the powers of magistrates, and takes that power into their own hands. So even within the Roman Republican, very strict emergency clauses, you have the idea of the temporality, the temporal limits of these restrictions. So these key features were, of course, not something that would be purely copied from Roman texts. And that is why, the reason why is, of course, that the Roman Republic did not have a constitution. It did not have a written constitution in the sense that we understand constitutions to be right now. So Roman constitution was the mos maiorum, the ways of the ancients, so mos as opposed to jus. The reason why there was a mos maiorum is, of course, a very good question. So there are, of course, leges Liciniae Sextiae, which changed the constitutions, which were laws. But the basic of that law was still the custom, the time immemorial. what that of course meant that when you have a custom, that what custom means is that you need to have somebody who is able to define that custom. And that definitional power is, in most places, very limited to those who have a memory. And this memory is interesting in the sense that if we go to fields such as folklore studies, that they have studied quite a lot how the historical memory is formulated when it's sort of like you can have things that one person remembers, and then that person might, for example, you might know your grandparents and be able to have discussed your grandparents. If you're lucky and your family is extremely long living, you could have been talking with your great grandparents. But that's it. That memory sort of like ends there. And what happens after that, if you look at a text like Jan van Sinas, who's a famous folklorist, is that you have what's called the floating gap, a nebulous area from which personal recollections end, and then after that begins the realm of myth. Since if you don't have historical writing, what you only thing you have is this kind of mythical or legendary recollections of events that have happened. And folklorists have studied quite a lot of how this transition happens when they've, for example, compared versions of events in which you have, for example, Western scholars who have made written notes on the historical tradition, and then they compare it with the oral tradition or the folklore of that. And what happens is that the events might be the same, but what sort of like becomes more central is that what is the meaning of that event. And for authors such as Cicero, who was very much about defining what the Amos Maiorem was, there is a kind of connection to historical tradition in which the aristocracy, because of their single-minded focus on their own history, becomes the guardian of that tradition for the city of Rome itself and the Roman Republic. So that the aristocrats become the group who can define what is the content of the Mos Maiorum. And therefore, because they are able to define it, they also become kind of monopolizing the content of politics. So what it means that if something is beyond politics, in this case, is that it is the ancestors, and the ancestors have done thus. If you're saying that this is the way of the ancestors, you are removing that point from the political discussion. And what Cicero in his text, so De Republica, De Legibus, but also very much in his other texts, especially his Philippics, he is discussing what makes a republic. And if you read your Cicero, that quite a lot of his texts are these dialogues between this maiores, so for example, Quintus Mucius Scaevola, or other people, so the older respected people that Cicero himself knew. And what he sort of like puts in their mouth is the kind of conception of the republic that he envisages. So for Cicero, it is a republic of law. For Cicero, it is a very much an aristocratic-led republic. It is a republic that has this kind of traditional authority that is defined not only by rash innovations, but rather by the fact that you go with tradition, you go with what has been found good through long usage. And therefore, when you're reading Cicero or applying Cicero, you are actually taking this, what I think Franz Wiecker, a German, one of the most famous German authors, is that you are actually entering the world of Cicero. So that Cicero himself, because his writings are so voluminous, you are actually entering the world that he creates around his texts. And you enter it in Cicero's terms. So very much of these texts in Cicero was also very popular during the Middle Ages. It is very much, the Republican tradition is very much a Ciceronian tradition. Second great text is, of course, the History of Rome by Livy. It is often called the Ab Urbe Condita, but that is, of course, a purely an invented name. The text of Livy is quite interesting because Livy collects a lot of that historical tradition. So there is a Roman historical tradition that extends to the late 3rd, early 2nd century BC, but very little is known of that. So very little comes directly. And so what Livy does is that when he's writing in Augustan Rome, he is recreating the history of the Republic. And what happens there is that he doesn't simply recreate it, but he creates a republic. He creates a republican tradition that has a very curious function in Augustan Rome. So it is, at the same time, Livy's text is basically a praise of Rome and Romans, of the Roman Republic, its struggles, the duty ethics, the virtus, the idea of this attachment and obedience of the state. And yeah, take that out. Okay. Yeah. So Livy is also very much a favorite of the medieval and Renaissance writers. So if you look at, for example, Machiavelli, or even some of the early modern authors, most of their examples of what Rome is and what early Rome was come from Livy. Of course, we can compare the accounts of Livy with other writers such as the Dionysius of Halicarnassus and Diocasius and so forth, but mostly it is Livy who provides us the narrative. He gives the meaning of what is Rome. And the idea of that is, of course, that he focuses so much on early Rome, that Rome emerges as a perfect republic, even when it's officially a kingdom, and then becomes perfected by the expulsion of the kings and the struggle of the orders. So his Rome is very much this kind of a creation story of Augustan Rome. And it is very much discussed and debated, and I've participated in those debates about whether or not Livy is Augustan or anti-Augustan in his views. It is really hard to tell. It is probably impossible to say because within Augustan Renaissance or Augustan idea of recreation of Rome, there is a very strong linkage between the old Republican tradition. So if we now look at how these key texts were then read, of course, we don't have time to go to, for example, Tacitus or Pliny, but these texts were reread, recreated, but also Rome was very much emulated. And I'll just give you two examples of the kind of symbols and symbolism of Republic. So let's take the first one. And this is from Athens. It is the so-called Philopappus or Philopappos monument from Athens. And there you can see a quite curious combination. You have Roman togas, you have clearly what looks like to be a triumphal procession. You have the Triumphator in the quadriga leading the triumphal procession, and then you have the two headless figures up there. And what the figures there are seated upon, that is the Sella Curulis. The Sella Curulis is the seat, the official seat of the Roman magistrate. It is where a Roman official would have jurisdiction. It is a sign of that power given to him. So much like the lictors are the sign of imperium, the Sella Curulis is a sign of jurisdiction. So it is something that the chair is handled by public slaves, and so when a magistrate sits down on that, the location can be anywhere. Actually, Gaius and Ulpian both mentioned that that a magistrate has jurisdiction or can exercise jurisdiction wherever he is seated on a Sella Curulis. And so what happens there is that we have the two figures. The other figure there is Gaius Julius Antiochus IV Epiphanes, who is the last Roman client king of Commagenia, and he ruled from 38 to 72 AD. You shouldn't confuse him with Antiochus IV Epiphanes, who is the much more famous Seleucid king, who was, by the way, who invaded Egypt during the 2nd century BC and was stopped in his invasion by a single Roman senator who said that he should go back because otherwise he'll be at war. And he said he did that. But Antiochus IV was a large king or divine emperor of this realm in Syria, whereas Gaius Julius Antiochus was a client king of Rome in Commagenia, which is a very small. And the other person there is his grandson and namesake, Gaius Julius Antiochus Epiphanes Philopappus. So you can add the Philopappus to the end, and who was who in this inscription that is here in this monument defines himself as a Roman consul, frater arvales, and being of praetorian rank. And so in both of those cases, both Antiochuses here are non-Romans initially. So they are inhabitants of the Greek-speaking East, people who are being drawn into the Roman orbit, both culturally and politically and also physically, and they reinvent themselves. So they are divine kings. But while they are divine kings, and I think they would actually say that they are divinities, they are also defining themselves as Romans, and even more so Roman magistrates. So there is this kind of combination of this Hellenistic tradition of the divine king and the idea of the Roman magistrate, the idea of Roman republicanism, and the idea that you have a magistrate who is entrusted with the power of the people, and therefore he sits on the chair, which is a symbol of that. And so that the Roman magistrate and the divine king are sort of like becoming one. So I'm trying to move. So the question remains here is that when we have this kind of 1990s tradition of the studies on Romanization, so that how people in the provinces of Rome and in the Roman orbit of the Roman Empire, how they emulated Rome or copied Rome, that the old tradition was that they described it as Romanization, that they were sort of like becoming Roman. But I would say, and this is something that is an emerging tradition, is that this is not something that they are one thing and then becoming another, but rather that they are evolving in and by themselves. They are taking attributes and they are becoming something that makes references to what they understand to be Rome and the cultural pull of the Roman Republic. So that if you look at the history of pre-Roman, so Hellenistic Greece and early Roman Greece, it is always that you have Roman magistrates, representatives of the Roman Senate, moving about, acting as arbitrators between the different city-states. And so Rome and its republic were a sign of power and authority, but also something incomprehensible for. And that's something that historians repeat again and again, that they don't understand why Romans are doing that, that Romans are frightening in their kind of ways of doing things, that they can't understand why they're doing that and why somebody's called that and somebody is called that. So it is a way of understanding and making these cultural conversations or cultural conversions. Another example that I would like to show you is the on the other end of the Republican tradition, so late Renaissance Florence, where you have this. I had a lot of different examples, but I decided to take a couple of minor examples of this. So this is Renaissance Florence and how the Medici family utilized the ancient Roman presidents. So the coins, let's start with the coins. There is, here if you look at the coin, there it has the two daggers and the cap. That is a copy of Brutus's coin, so a coin minted by the other of the killers of Julius Caesar, and it is very much a reference to tyrant slayers. And so it is a copy of the Roman coin, a Roman denarius, but it is made by Lorenzino de' Medici, a 16th century Medici. And Lorenzino had murdered his cousin, Alessandro. And in order to justify this, he turned to the ancient Roman tradition and declared that his cousin was actually a tyrant and therefore lawfully killed as a tyrant, and in order to save the Florentine Republic. The other one here is Cosimo de' Medici, who is there dressed as Augustus, so the Emperor Augustus. You can see that there's the very much a reference to the plates, the breastplate of several of the Augustus busts. The hair and beard is that there's a bit of a I would say 3rd century Roman influence going on there. But Cosimo was very famous for his own references that in his public propaganda that he used is ancient Roman references and stylistic features. He called himself Pater Patriae, the father of the fatherland, in imitation of Augustus. So what here we can see is that what Cosimo is doing is that he is from the Roman tradition looking for a suitable form of being superior, so superior in ways that would not make him a victim of his relative Alessandro, who had murdered only a few decades prior. So Florence was a very curious case. So if you have in the, for example, in the Greek East, you had Roman colonias, Roman settlements, which were populated by Romans, mostly Roman citizens who followed the republican forms, in which you had the assemblies, you had the magistrate, you had the council, whereas the Greek or Greek-speaking inhabitants who were not Roman citizens would also would follow their own rules. In Florence, what we have is actually originally a Roman city. It's still slightly contested whether Florence was founded by Sulla or Caesar or some other Roman, but Florence was originally a Roman colony. So what we have in Florence is that there is a Roman city which is in the Middle Age transformed into an aristocratic-led city, which is then reformed again into a Roman-style republic. So it is from a Roman city to a Romanistic city. And in there, the idea of equality is quite superior. So what we have in the kind of Florentine discussions is, of course, the Florentine Republic is very different from the Roman Republic. You have the role of the guilds, you have the role of the aristocracy, also aristocracy that has quite strict connections abroad. so outside the city, you have that you are still a fief of the Roman emperor, who happens to be the Greco-Roman emperor, the Germanic emperor, and so forth. But still, there is the kind of ideas of this kind of active participation. You have the virtue of the mediocritas, the idea that everyone has to be equal also in shape, and so that one's wealth and prestige should not rise too much above his fellow citizens, so as to upend the republican structure and so forth. So that there is a huge number of these kind of examples of how Florentine republicans attempted and experimented in different ways of creating an equitable and equal republic. And in all of this, that there is a kind of continuous reference to ancient Rome, and ancient Rome as an example, as a model, a way of doing things that is superior in many shapes and forms. And then when you have the kind of Medici takeover, even the Medici themselves follow the al antico strategy, in which that they are trying to experiment justifying this in this kind of iconographic forms. So within all of this, the question is, oh, does the United States capital, another Romanistic reference, that there is a kind of idea of Rome being reborn and Rome being rebirthed in different shapes and forms. Now I'm just going to take off the screen sharing. Let's see, stop share. Oh, excellent. So, what we have in this is the recycling and repurposing of the ideas of republicanism. Thomas Hobbes talked of the ancient texts as the bites of a mad dog. In that, he referenced that an ancient text, when read later on, can produce ideas, can instill people with desires of something that they consider to be good and worthy of attempting. So it is not purely that there were texts that were resurfaced, or that there was an antiquarism, that people were interested in ancient texts, or the kind of usage of the al antico style in making this statues and coins and so forth. It is not even the idea of classicism in itself as the kind of pervasive feature of Western civilization. It is very much all of that, and combined with the idea of renewal. And in this, the idea of renewal is very interesting, because it is also very much the question of what is new and what is repurposed. So if you look at what the examples of the republicanist tradition from the Renaissance to early modern period to late to the Enlightenment, it is very much a repurposing of the history of ancient Rome. There's, some biblical references, some references of the Greek states, but it's mostly a repurposing of that. So the Roman tradition is in the case of law, has been described as a treasure chest that you can find examples and suitable bits and pieces to fit for all intents and purposes or for all kinds of needs. But the idea of republicanism, where you have actually the whole, is the most important thing, not the details. It is an even more important feature. So Rome, in this sense, gave a model. Rome gave a template through which one could figure out how to do a republic. Even as late as when you have the French Revolutionary National Convent, which gathered under the watchful guise of these statues of the great old Romans and discussed ancient Roman historical examples. They were looking at Rome to see what is a republic, what makes a republic, how can we do a republic. And I think that's a very good place for me to end. So thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to your comments.
Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you very much. It was very, very interesting. I think we have some time to some comments, some questions. I have some of my own, but someone wants to start? Someone have a question? Okay, so I will begin. Professor, today, of course, new interpretations of the Roman Republic also appear in the specialized literature in history, ancient history, and political thought. The new Republicans like Pettit and Skinner are trying to recover a long tradition of politics, an ancient way to think, libertas, the Constitution, and so on. And other authors, I think, for example, Rafael Domingo Osley or Benjamin Straumann, Giovanni Lobrano, these authors trying to connect the practice of Roman law and the Republican tradition to a form of constitutional history, constitutional theory, constitutional thought. How do you perceive this reinterpretation and other reinterpretations of our time about the Roman Republic? Do you think this is a new kind of analysis of the role of authority? What do you think is behind these recent renewals, these recent new interpretations of the Roman republicanism?
That is actually a very, very good question. It is often said that that each era needs to rewrite its own histories, and of course we haven't yet seen what will be the republicanism of the Trump era, but you still already have this kind of in smaller publications and articles, this kind of idea of the republic run amok. So I would say that this is very much a question of that tradition being mined for answers to questions that come from very much from the current everyday experience. And so if you look at the and now I think I'm being slightly having a free interpretation, but say if you look at the way, for example, this the question of the state of exception has been a central focus, the idea of that you have rules and then you have exceptions, and that how those became suddenly not purely academic, but also very much real in the war on terror. And suddenly you have a massive flow of different kind of publications that are trying to figure out what that state of exception is and can be. And for example, you mentioned Benjamin Straumann. Of course, this is a very, very good book. Benjamin is also a good friend of mine, so I'm doing slight publicity for him here. So the question there is that that if Benjamin started writing that in 2006, 2007, and how his idea of that was, and because we were living both in New York at that point, that this was something that was all the time discussed, the kind of state of exception. Is his text a reference to that, or is it something that comes up obliquely discussing that? It's impossible to say that what is the kind of, where is the George W. Bush or Rumsfeld in this book? But it is the Rumsfeld is, and the kind of Guantanamo Bay is very much a part of the process of making this book. And even though I'm an intellectual historian, I still can't say whether or not on how that kind of the environment made its way into that book, because of course every single reference there is to ancient Roman authors.
Thank you, thank you. Someone have a question or a comment want to share with us?
Well, I would like to make a, and I'm sorry, I lost the last minutes. My internet was unstable, and I don't know what happened. And thank you so much, Professor Tuori, for your lecture. This is really interesting, and there is something that is strike for me about the Romans and about the history of the Roman Republic and the way that we deal with them, is that probably none of us had a real connection with the real Roman. To me, we deal with several different layers of interpretations and several different layers of different comprehensions about the meaning of the Roman Republic. Even from the Romans, I think that when we check the writers from the 1st century before Christ, like Livy or others, we see that in a certain sense, that is not new. We have books on that they are trying to get in touch with a Roman they doesn't have anymore. And in that sense, they kind of create their own past or something like that. That's, of course, is the case of Machiavelli. That is, he kind of imagined his own Rome. And I'm not telling that people are lying or creating something, images or something like that. But the thing is that, and that's the question, that sometimes Rome is just a starting point to think about our own realities, like the US revolutionaries in the 17th century, or the French revolutionaries in the 18th century, and the people from Renaissance. That's to say, they use Rome to try to a start point to think about their own problems and fragile realities or something like that. Even for the Roman Republic, we check that if we live, we're going to see that during the 5th and 4th century before Christ, Roman Republic stayed like several decades with no consuls at all. They don't respect the term, the terms, or the time, the time of the terms of the magistrates and stuff like that. So the thing is, there's a real Rome, that one that we can get in touch with, or Rome is always a kind of idea that we take to ourselves to get our own problems faced?
Thank you very much. That's very very astute of you. That's actually a very difficult question. There is, within these layers of interpretation, there are of course, some practical features involved. So that if you are discussing ancient Rome, most of the, especially the earlier authors. So if you have something like a historical author writing about Rome and the Republic, Rome and its Republic has a very good way of operating as a surrogate stage in which you can talk about many things that you couldn't discuss with direct speech by using ancient examples. You can use commentaries of Livy to talk about tyranny in situations where talking about bad things about the current ruler would lead you to be arrested or your book being censored. So there is this question of using it as a surrogate stage. Another question is, of course, that of interpretation. So in art history, there's Winkelmann, or in the late 18th century, discussed the question of that, should one be inspired by the classical art or seek to repeat it to make a copy of that ancient art? And what I think is important in this is that what they are, in most cases, came to the conclusion that what you need to do is not an exact replica, but rather to, in the kind of imitation of ancient art, you aim for the sublime experience. And in this sense, that the republic that you are seeking to create or seeking to envision is not something that is a historically authentic Roman republic, but rather a perfection of that republic based on Roman models. So I think that's the kind of the replication versus sublimation is the kind of important distinction here.
Yeah, just a quick comment. I always think about that when we read the Federalist Papers and the Anti-Federalists, because both sides thought about themselves as the real Romans. So Publius was the signature for the Federalist Papers, and Brutus was the signature for the Anti-Federalist Papers. That was a kind of a debate: who is more Roman, who is more Republican? And both sides believe that they are the fine example of a kind of a Roman heritage. And I think this is not a question; it's just a comment. And I think that is fun to see. Well, we need an agreement. So who is the real Roman? It's just something like that. Is in that sense, it's just I don't know. It's just kind of looking for an image of a self-comprehension and using the Romans as this. And I can say for ourselves that we live in a republic, a lot of problems, and our research group in here, we are kind of, even that historian says, that's Skinner especially, saying, don't try to look to the writers of the past to solve your own problems. It's a problem of your own. But anyhow, we kind of try to look to a kind of a perfect republic to see how we can fix our own problematic republic. But it's just a thought and to share with you guys. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you very much. That is something that I do quite a lot when I teach Roman law for the law school students, and for example, with the kind of legislative processes, when you can just show that this is actually step by step, more or less, a copy. The Finnish legislative process is a copy of the Roman legislative process. It is a, you can see that the students suddenly realize that what is the role of the historical tradition, that they are living in a that they are becoming parts of a very long continuum. And what do you do with that tradition is, of course, a very good question, but it's of course your question. What is your relationship with that tradition and what you do with that tradition?
Okay.
I think Patterson has a question.
Yes, I do. Thank you, Professor. It was a very interesting talk. Sorry, I don't have a camera on me, so I can't show my face. But so I was wondering if you could talk a bit more about how the idea of democracy has intersected with republic and Romanism, because although the US, for example, is a republic, contemporary interpretations and interventions to also deal with this democratic ideal. So this is also the case everywhere, where governments are officially republics, but relate only indirectly to the Roman tradition. So that when they don't try so hard to emulate it, its symbols, its rhetoric. So maybe you could, I just was interested if you could talk a little bit more about this idea of democracy and how it has intersected with these ideas that you have talked about. Thank you.
Thank you. No, that's again a very, very enormous question. I think already someone like Benjamin Constant had a very astute observation of the kind of difference between ancient and modern republics and the ideas of democracy and republicanism. I think there is, especially in democracy theory, that there is a tendency of approaching republicanism as a kind of a perverted form of democracy, and therefore that's something that if you are dealing with that, you're sort of like closeted authoritarian. What I would say is that there is a kind of a very different and historically very contentious notion of democracy. That democracy, if republic makes a very, very strange interpretative reformulations and reinterpretations, I would say that democracy makes them even more. That what we understand as democracy and what the ancient democracies understood was something completely different. And that's something that this kind of oppositionality between democracy and republic, that's also something that you know already in the Greek authors. So that many of the ancient Greek authors who were observing when Romans came to Greece and began reorganizing things, so that the Greek city-states, which were reorganized by Romans, that the Romans abolish democracy and instill councils and magistrates. And therefore it is something that it is a completely different system. And the fundaments of that system are completely different. I don't know whether I answered your question in any way, but I think I'll let you a chance of disagreeing with me if you wish.
No, that's all right. That's all right. Thank you. That was great.
I have one more question, Professor. You know, to the Republican tradition is a great matter of debate. The role of the social and political struggle in the Republican Constitution and the Republican tradition. We know that this debate, this theme, was imported in very different ways in authors so different, such Machiavelli or Schmidt in his book about dictatorship. The question for the guardian of the Constitution continues on until today. But thinking especially in the Roman sources like Cicero, Livy, for you, what is the divisory line between a beneficial or an inventive struggle, a struggle which creates new things, creates new institutions, and a bad, destructive or a vicious struggle that is a threat for the Republic itself?
I think it's a question of viewpoint, quite simply. So on the one hand, you can have a beneficial reinterpretation and readaptation of the we'll just take one example of that might have relevance in Brazil, for example, land rights or the position of the landless population. And you have a huge Roman tradition of this kind of redistribution of public lands, this limits of 2 jugera per head or so forth, and which have a centuries of both populistic and non-populistic reinterpretation and readaptation. So I think the question there is that what these ancient texts give is they enlarge the imaginary. So if we take the social sciences, they discuss the concept of a social imaginary. So things that what you can imagine as being possible. And the ancient texts give you a knowledge of history widens your imaginary so that you see what kind of things are possible, but also give you examples of what kind of things can happen if you do this and this and this. And so, for example, in the late Republic, that there's all these calls for redistribution of lands or cancellation of debts and so forth. And quite often in the ancient authors that these people like the Gracchi, that they end up dead. And what kind of exemplum that is at that point? What is the reading of that exemplum? Because these are controversial things, these are contradictory things, even to the Roman authors. And the rereading of these texts and rereading of these examples is even more contradictory. So I would say that it is that there is no good or bad. There is only the kind of enlargement of the kind of horizon of what is possible and what is not possible, and giving some clues of what may or may not happen.
Thank you. We have some more questions. Okay, so I wish to thank you, Professor Tuori, once again for accepting our invite. I hope we can see you soon physically here in Brazil in past times. And I want to thank you everyone to join with us today. And briefly, we will public the next session of these Capitoline seminars. So thank you very much once again to all of you, and especially for Professor Kaius Tuori.
Thank you very much for your kind invitation. It was, and your very, very difficult questions. These were really gave me a lot of thought, and also it's very fruitful, this kind of difficult questions. So it was great fun talking with you, and I hope that I have the chance of doing that in person in a not too distant future.
Yes, we hope so. Okay, so I will stop the record and finish this conversation. Thank you to all of you once again. Have a nice day, Professor. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much. See you next time.